Morning, everyone. Happy Mondays and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's online political editor, Dan Bloom, who's just about managed to get himself online this morning. Morning, Dan.
It's my fault we're late. Tech issues here in Parliament, the mother of parliaments and not really the mother of tech support. So.
No, as a mother of all problems. So anyway, this is the People's Paper Review. So get into the comments, ask us your questions. The best ones not only get up on the screen, but they may get a news agenda mug. There's one left in our current batch, sitting there, needs a home. So what have we got? Well, the Mirror has splashed on a call for blood donors, because tackling those NHS backlogs we've got means that demand is very high, but coronavirus means that the supply is low. So on the ticker down the bottom, we've got a link to the NHS donor page, which is blood.co.uk. It's not difficult anyway, where you can find out where your nearest one is. They need O negative and A negative. If you have a couple of pints spare, go and give them some. Now, meanwhile, you'd have thought that the Tory cost of living crisis couldn't possibly get any worse. What with 50% energy hikes, massive inflation predicted to hit 7%, and a surge in food prices. But according to Dan's story in the paper today, according to the boss of Tesco, this is just the start. But what I don't get down is we've got the worst slide in living standards since records began. It seems almost impossible that things could get more expensive and actually still be sustainable. So can you take us through what John Allen said yesterday and explain his sums to us?
Sure. Well, I think the problem is that we've got the worst slide since living standards began, which is coming in April, and some of it has already started. And that's the issue here, is that you've heard a lot talked about it. You're already seeing a squeeze on the bills, but what people are actually talking about is what's coming in April, when we've got the national insurance hike, you've got freezes on tax thresholds and student loan repayment thresholds. And then you've got what John Allen said yesterday. So Tesco boss on the Andrew Marr show, he said that the worst is yet to come. Some people are going to have to choose between heating and eating. And while Tesco has kind of controlled its price rises to about 1% so far in the last quarter, that will move to sort of 5%. Now, as the boss of Tesco, you'd expect, he was on the defensive. He was saying Tesco has always tried to keep prices low. A can of beans costs less now than it did 5 years ago if you go for the cheapest range. That's pretty much in contrast to what people like Jack Monroe say, where they say these value ranges are being actually stealthily removed. But he wasn't quite as sure when he was confronted over Tesco's, I think, 2.4 or so, or 2.6 billion profits in the last year. So, but I think the point to take from it is that when even the chairman of Tesco is saying some families will have to choose between heating and eating, that's when you're in real trouble.
Yeah, it probably won't be his family, will it? They could take a 5% hit on 2.6 billion, for goodness sake. But it's not just the 5% Tesco price hikes, is it? Like you said there, Jack Monroe, the food blogger, has said that some value ranges they're getting cut, the prices of packets are getting smaller, that the prices aren't, and then the prices are rising on others, which means some sort of value staples, things like rice, are going up by as much as 344%. And on top of this, your story says that the £200 so-called discount from Rishi Sunak for our heating bills, which is in reality a taxpayer loan to very profitable companies, which for some reason we've got to pay them twice, is going to be wiped out if you're a pensioner. How does that work out? There's effectively a freeze on pensions, is that right?
So not quite. Pensions are going up. They're going up by, my goodness, I don't have the figure in front of me, something like 3.1%, something like that. But the problem is that inflation has already gone beyond the point at which pensions are going up. So it's based on September's inflation figure. That was 3.1%. Now it's running at 4.8%. And there are predictions that it could now hit 7% in this kind of vicious circle, because actually energy bills count towards the measure of inflation. So now that energy bills are racking up, we're going to have something like 7% inflation. What all that means is that Labour have done this calculation. They've looked at how far the pension rise is behind inflation, and they've worked out that it's, if you're a couple, £355 for the year. Now, that's significant because the government help is £350 for the year, of which 200 has to be paid back. And the reason it's so controversial, of course, is because pensions would have gone up by more than 8% if the triple lock had stayed. At the time, and it seems like a long time ago last summer, this was viewed as supremely unfair because it was essentially based on a false bounce back in earnings, and it would have been seen as giving pensioners too much. Now, when inflation is soaring to that sort of level, it's being viewed in a rather different light, and a lot of people may be saying, I told you so.
Oh, crikey. So we've got, right, so we've got Rishi Sunak giving out what he says is £200 to every household, but he's taking some money effectively, according to Labour, from pensioners, and it's the same amount. So he's giving with one hand and taking with the other. And then we've got this issue about the pensions triple lock, which the Tories imposed 10 odd years ago and then said was unfair and unreasonable and removed, and now is suddenly looking like it would be quite handy to still have it for a lot of people. And on top of that, it says elsewhere in the paper that the social care levy is going to be hitting older people in the red wall much harder than pensioners in the south. So I think the question here is, and do let us know the answer in the comments. Let us know what you think about all this and how the price rises are going to affect you and what you're going to do about it. But the issue here, I suppose, is that all these freezes and fiscal drags and belt tightening down, they're very much in the Tory economic playbook. It's exactly the kind of thing they would be expected to do. But can it be sustainable? Can pensioners really afford to lose this much money effectively and yet still keep voting Tory? How long can the government hold out like this?
Well, Rishi Sunak, I remember going to a drinks do at the Tory conference where he gave a speech. Yeah, well, I know it's a tough job, this one, where Rishi Sunak came. We were told, in fact, there were whispers around the room there's going to be a big special guest, so everyone just assumed it was Boris Johnson, and in fact it was Rishi Sunak. Not that he's touting for the leadership or anything, who got up on stage and he said, I am a low tax conservative. And he spent a lot of the sort of conference hinting that he's going to cut taxes before the next election, in time for the next election. Now, that's a massive gamble because, number one, what about unforeseen circumstances? What if the cost of borrowing goes up, which means you have less fiscal headroom, is what they call it, to cut taxes? And the other thing is, a lot of people are going to just see through this and see that actually the tax burden is at its highest, I think, since the Second World War, but you might need to fact check me on that. And it's not just the national insurance hike that's the problem. It is these sort of stealthy freezes. So a couple of Fridays ago, on a Friday afternoon, no warning, we got a press release and a written statement about 3 p.m. saying, we have confirmed the student loan repayment thresholds for next year. What they'd done, in fact, was confirm that they're being frozen for the first time in 3-4 years. What that means is, as your salary goes up, the threshold at which you start repaying your student loan doesn't also go up with it. And so therefore there's a gap. I think it's people are paying £113 or so more than they expected to pay this year on their student loan. Now that's just a tiny thing, but it's a microcosm of what's happening, because the much bigger thing is that income tax thresholds, which work in exactly the same way, not exactly, but close enough, are also being frozen. And that will be a big kind of incremental hit. You're not seeing like money literally taken out of your pocket, but you're seeing less, you keep less of the money that you earn, you keep less than you would have expected to, and it starts to fall behind rising prices.
Being very
So
steadily, gently squeezed.
It's got real trouble here, because it's not just the squeezed middle as people used to talk about, although that is going to be a big thing. Tory voters, swing voters who are on kind of middle incomes, but it's also going to be people at the bottom of society, which they say they're helping, but things like so national insurance, you know, the think tanks say doesn't hit people at the very bottom of the income stream the most, but what does hit them is energy bills. Energy bills is actually much more significant than the national insurance rise for a lot of people. You're going to have millions of people spending more than 10%, 12% or whatever of their income, disposable income, on energy bills. So you've got a real squeeze for people who can't afford to be squeezed.
Exactly. Now, Caroline says, the other side of the fuel poverty crisis are people using unsuitable portable heaters. There's a high fire risk, all because people are worried about paying for their fuel, and all of it coupled with rent increases. It's just this, once you get, it seems, one of these things that starts happening. You've had a sort of a long period of fairly economic stability, I suppose you'd call it. Not much has happened. It hasn't gone up, hasn't gone down. It's just been fairly steady, although not grown very much. And then as soon as one thing sort of goes wrong, whether it's inflation or a price rise or the pandemic or Brexit, whatever you want to call it, everything just starts tumbling down. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. There's cost upon cost upon cost upon cost. So how can Rishi possibly ever cut a tax? Because he can say he's giving us 20 quid back, but it's never going to affect the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that people are having to pay out, if they've got it, of course.
Well, he can borrow more money, and he can put up taxes on things like windfall taxes on firms and big business and that kind of thing. Now, the two problems with that are, as a Tory, you don't want to do either of those things. Tories don't want to borrow more money because it's the one thing that they have is being ahead of on the economy. And actually, some polls are showing that Labour's current team is actually ahead of the Tories on the economy, which hasn't happened for a long time. And the other thing is to put up, you know, Labour's already been suggesting sort of windfall taxes on oil firms. Shell posted massive profits on the morning of the energy price cap last week. But that is just not something that they like contemplating. Downing Street haven't, you know, they tend not to rule things out, but they've kind of brushed away from that. So it's a real problem for him, and there might have to be some tough decisions, especially with news today that, you know, the NHS backlog plan was due to come today. We'd heard rumblings last week that there was a big health plan today. Instead, there's a new sort of website where you can follow how late your surgery is, rather than a full plan to get your surgery earlier. And that's, you know, it's being denied that it's the Treasury kicking that back. Sajid Javid claims it's just Omicron that delayed that. But there's something going on here, and there's a lot of tension in government about all this.
Chaos. Thank goodness we don't have the economic ruin we'd have with Jeremy Corbyn, eh? Seems much the same. Now, Mark says, is it true the UK is putting a 60% increase cap on fuel bills? Is it, Dan? I haven't heard that anywhere.
So I haven't got the exact percentage, but it's something like 50% increase or 50-something% increase in the price cap. It's what's important to understand. I didn't catch the name of the person who asked the question.
Mark.
Is it, Mark? It used to, when it was first introduced, yes, it was a sort of cap. So it was like, don't worry, your bills won't go any higher than this. Don't worry, it's, you know, it's going to be fine. This is the most you'll ever pay. But what's happened as gas prices have soared is that everything has, and this was the exact warning at the time, bunched around the cap. So basically, you just pay the cap. So if you're on a standard variable, which 22 million people are, then you pay the cap. And when it goes up by £693 average per household, depending on your energy usage, then that's about what you pay per year extra. And it used to be that you could get around the cap, you could go under it by getting fixed rate, sort of 1 year, 2 year deals. I had this problem last year. Talked about it in a Facebook Live last week, where I found that the fixed rate deals were actually more expensive than just staying on the standard variable. I'm not in my place for a huge amount of time, so I thought just stick with the standard variable, and sure enough, that's the one going up. So that's why there are 22 million people on standard variable deals. It's because it's meant to be a cap. Don't worry, it's not any higher, but actually it's just what you pay.
Yeah. So now they're talking about capping the cap, so it doesn't go too much higher than what is already massively high.
Well, you say that, but it's already scheduled to change. Now it can go up or down, but change in October. And the predictions are that it will go up, that it could go up by another £300 or so. And they've set an emergency mechanism where they could maybe put it up in July as well. If 28 energy firms have gone bust, if more energy firms go bust, they could kind of wade in and raise bills by an even higher amount in order to stop a mass kind of bankruptcy of these energy companies.
If an energy firm goes bust after a taxpayer bailout of billions, that the taxpayer is actually going to pay them again, the customer's going to pay them twice, then they don't deserve to be in existence in the first place. Now, Nathan Lindcrestwell says, rising food prices, but yet Tesco had a profit of 2.4 billion, so they can't be feeling the pinch that much. That was the point that we made earlier on, Nathan. They think they could probably withstand a couple of percent for our sake and just reduce their profits a bit. Ronnie says, how are we going to live at all? If the inflation is possibly going up by 7%, what will happen to hospitality? That's the biggest market in UK funding. It is a huge part of the economy, Dan. So if the cost of living goes up, people start living hand to mouth. They don't go out. They don't go to the pub. They may still go to the bookies, some of them, but they're not going to be spending in quite the same way that they were. And that has a knock-on effect with the rest of the economy, doesn't it? Then there's a recession, then there's a crunch, and then it's, oh my God, it's the 80s all over again. Can you hear us, Dan?
I can. I didn't know how to respond to that. It's just pretty depressing.
There isn't. Rishi Sunak's in the same boat. He doesn't know what to do.
Well, that's the thing, is he's got a real problem, and what he's responding with is giving a sort of giving you half of what your energy bills will cost you, and then none of what the national insurance and all the rest of it will cost you. And what he says is he's essentially come out, in shades of the 80s and Thatcher, and has said we cannot afford to, in this world, keep the price of things artificially low. We cannot ignore the market, ignore the soaring wholesale gas prices, and just give people the sort of steady level of what they're paying now. And that's a policy choice, and it's a very difficult one.
Yeah. It's very quickly, last question, Lorraine. Everything's going up but the minimum wage. This is disgusting. Is there any suggestion? We've had these arguments over the weekend with the Bank of England saying wages shouldn't go up, and the Prime Minister saying, no, we want people to be able to earn more money. Are they going to raise the minimum wage by threepence for us?
They are. They're raising it by, I think, more than 6% on April the 1st. It's from £8.91 to £9.50 if you're over 23. If you're under 23, it's slightly different. So they are raising the minimum wage. There's the question of whether that's enough for people who are on kind of gig economy or part-time or that sort of thing, where perhaps they earn a little bit more than than the minimum wage at the moment, but what they earn is still not enough for the cost of their life. The Living Wage Foundation says essentially the minimum wage isn't really enough to live on in anything approaching comfortably or safely in London, for example, where prices are much higher, and I think they say it's not enough in the rest of the country too, just by a smaller margin. So they are raising the minimum wage, and you'll hear them talk about it every time. It's just a question of whether that's the right thing or enough.
And it's 60 pence an hour. Woohoo! Don't spend it all at once, everybody. Elsewhere in the paper, there's talk about a there's talk from the Royal Society for Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce, which says the sort of jobs mostly held by social housing tenants are going to be increasingly lost to robots in the next few years. So that's something else to look forward to. So keep asking us your questions, get into the comments, let us know how you feel about the cost of living crisis. Are you managing okay? Are the prices going up already? Are you going to be struggling? What do you think Rishi Sunak should do to fix it? Because that's one of the fundamental issues that even he doesn't seem to have grasped yet. And speaking of people who could be replaced by robots, let's go on to Downing Street, where there's supposed to be some very clever people in charge of fixing everything. Instead, we've got a burst bag of flour in the shape of Boris Johnson, who is working very hard to fix his own problems by getting some steady hands in, apparently, to replace those 5 aides who ran screaming from the building last week. So, Dan, who have we got in there and what's wrong with them exactly?
Give them a chance, Susie.
There will be.
They've only just come in. So he's got a new chief of staff who is Stephen Barclay. I think that the problem that you'd say with him is that he's got 3 jobs. So when we were first briefed this on Saturday, we were told he is keeping his job as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, which involves things like, data management and national security and overseeing all sorts of incredibly important matters of state in the Cabinet Office. It's the job that Michael Gove had until quite recently. And of course, he's an MP. MPs and ministers are always usually the same thing. They have 2 jobs, but the third job of literally running the Prime Minister's day-to-day diary just seemed like a step too far. And you had 3 former chiefs of staff saying that it wasn't possible. Then on the other hand, you've got Guto Hurry, who was a sort of Johnson lieutenant for many years. He's fairly respected. He's going to become the director of communications, but there's going to be some issues there where he criticised the Johnson machine before, and he was not sort of the most vocal supporter of some of the kind of culture war type stuff that the Johnson regime was going down and some of the lines they were taking. So I don't know, will he keep Boris Johnson honest? That's a real challenge. Will he kind of ramp up, because he's also quite sort of on the front foot and quite aggressive with his comms. He's already tried to slap down Dominic Cummings, who's putting out a blog, so it seems today, on more claims about the Prime Minister's flat. So, will he be Johnson times a million, or will he take him in a different direction? And then after all that, I think the biggest problem, which is what Gavin Barwell, Theresa May's former chief of staff, said on the weekend, is whatever advice he's getting, will Boris Johnson listen to it? Because last week when he made that claim about Jimmy Savile and Keir Starmer not prosecuting Jimmy Savile, which was misleading and wrong, he was apparently advised by his number 10 aides not to go anywhere near it, and then he said it anyway. So it's going to be a pretty rubbish job if you're telling the Prime Minister brilliant things, which I'm sure they will, and he doesn't even listen. So it's going to be a real challenge.
So Boris and Honest on mutually exclusive terms. I've got a Guto Harry story about Boris Johnson. Boris is not honest, says Kelly. I'll tell you this, right, very quickly before we go on to good news. I might even get a column out of this today. Back in 2008, I was a news reporter on the Sunday Mirror. Just a lowly nobody. And I had to ring Guto Harry once. Boris Johnson was Mayor of London at the time. And I rang him and I said, Guto, we've got a story. Boris Johnson, this is when he was cycling to work every morning, right? And going through traffic on his bike. And there are all these stories about how taxi drivers go, all right, Boris, every morning, right? And I rang Guto and said, Guto, we've got a story. Boris Johnson on his way to work today, jumped a couple of red lights, mounted the curb, careered through traffic, knocked down a little girl, whatever, all this stuff that worst possible thing you could do, smashed the highway code, made a complete mess of London, basically. Everything that you would expect, with hindsight, him to have done when he's on a bike. And Guto said, well, look, Susie, off the record, he's my Welsh accent, he's off the record. I've spoken to Boris about cycling, and he's very, very good. He's evangelical about following the rules of the road and the highway code and good cycling, and you would never do that. Never. Where on earth, he said, where on earth did you get your story? And I said, well, Guto, we had a photographer and a bike behind him, and he videoed the whole thing. And Guto just paused for one beat, and he went, well, in that case, Boris is very, very sorry. Which
that is, unfortunately, it's the mark of a a good spin doctor, isn't
Exactly.
it?
He
Not so good for
pivoted
us, but good
instantly.
for him. You
A
know.
360-degree pivot in seconds. But fine, okay, you've got the evidence. I'm going to cough to it all, which would be
Well,
nice.
in that case, he'll be very much at home, won't he? U-turns and
but also fully aware that Boris Johnson talks a load of old. Anyway, Marlene says the Tories have been fast enough to give themselves an 11% pay increase. I think you're talking about the MP's pay rise, Marlene. Officially, they say that this is an independent pay review body. It goes to Labour and all the MPs, regardless of party. I would say that's not a particularly independent pay review body, because it's done by the people who are employed in that body are employed as a result of the Speaker's Committee in Parliament, which is a committee of MPs. So although they may be independent and have some rules and so on and so forth, they are appointed by the people whose pay they decide. And I think that stinks, personally. If it was a jury of you and me, Marlene and Dan, I think we would probably have a fairer pay award. It wouldn't be 11%, would it?
I'm not sure where the pay rise has gone up to. I'm not sure if it is 11%, but no. I'll park that one and go and check.
It would still be, I'm sure pensioners are getting less. Anyway, we've got to move on very quickly. Get into the comments, ask us your questions. What do you think about Boris Johnson's reset in Downing Street? Do you think that's going to solve his problems? How are you going to cope with the price rises? Is that going to be a bigger problem for you than Partygate? Let us know. But first off, there is some good news in the world, and it's really good news today. You want to stick around for this? Here it is. Now, for years, we have been told that belly fat is the worst kind of fat. But there's a study by Tel Aviv University in Israel which has found a way to inject your own belly fat into the spine of paralyzed mice. And they're able to walk again because it mimics what happens with stem cells when you're an embryo and they're building your spinal column. And it could mean if it works in humans as well, because they've only done it in mice, but it could mean personalized implants for accident victims. You become paralyzed, they just inject some belly fat and you're up and running around again. Dan, does this mean that those of us all carrying a little extra weight around our waistlines can legitimately claim it's a first aid kit?
I wish I thought of that one. I basically got told to lose some weight after lockdown, and I've lost about 1.5 stone actually.
Well done.
In the last might be a year by now actually. So very slow going, but yeah, maybe I should have kept. I mean, I've still got plenty. So
you need to keep a little bit in reserve.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, it's fantastic, isn't it? Because it's 2 in 1. You take the fat away and put it where it's needed. But I somehow suspect they're not going to give you a sort of full, a full flat tummy.
No, and I don't think
accident. It'll still be a pretty grim process.
Yeah, and I think they're probably only going to need a syringe full. They're not going to need the whole belly. But I'm sure perhaps when the plastic surgeons find out a way that liposuction as a byproduct can actually, be used as stem cells to fix all your other issues, then we'll all be in there doing it. Right, have we got any questions to wrap with, or are we just about finished? Those of you, I'm just going to remind you about the blood donors that are needed, O negative and A negative. Go to blood.co.uk and sign up if you haven't. There you go, Melanie. Where do I sign up? Blood.co.uk. It's in the ticker. Go and sign up. They need all they can get because we've got issues with actually doing the backlog and the surgeries and everything else. And the people have not been coming forward for the last couple of years. So do what you can. Thank you very much for joining us, Dan. Thank you, everyone, for taking part and your comments. And hopefully we'll be back on Wednesday and we'll be reporting another government collapse, perhaps more Guto Harry stories. Who knows? Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.